Hello and welcome to this special discussion on the wire on demonetization. The devastating effects of demonetization are still with us, although the period of demonetization and the replacement of notes is nearly 50% over as per RBI's submission before the Parliamentary Standing Committee. They have claimed that 60% of the money which was withdrawn has been replaced, but they are still not giving us the exact amount that has come back, and they are also not telling us when full normalcy will be restored, in the sense withdrawal without restrictions will be allowed. Now to discuss the effects of demonetization to the economy in view of the budget, union budget, which is coming up on 1st February, and before that there is an economic survey which will have to capture whatever has happened to the economy post demonetization in the last 6 months of the financial year. We have with us former professor of JNU Arun Kumar, who was with us some time ago to discuss demonetization, and he has done extensive work on black money and the black economy, and he is also coming out with a monograph on the current situation where the black economy is headed post demonetization. You'll have that monograph very soon in the market. Welcome to our show.
Thanks.
Professor Arun Kumar. Please tell us, how do you see the economy behaving now? The government is going to a budget, and a lot of people are saying with what data are they going to the budget, because nobody's really nobody has studied the actual or quantified the effects of demonetization, the loss of output, which we are getting from various associations, trade associations, manufacturing associations. How do you see this developing?
So, the situation, as was anticipated, has led to recessionary conditions deepening in the economy. Why? Because investment has declined, and for that the data from CMI suggests that investment already before October was declining because capacity utilization was very low, and post demonetization, as capacity utilization has fallen further, their data shows that actually investment has gone down further. Similarly, unemployment in the unorganized sector, and therefore unemployment also in the organized sector where the demand was short, that has also increased. Then banking system is in a crisis because it is likely that their NPAs are going to increase. They are unable to lend out, whereas they actually got deposits, so their costs have risen. So in other words, if banking is in a crisis, if your investments are declining, if unemployment is rising, then that is what recession is all about. So the economy is facing recessionary.
You expect a recession?
Yes. So the recessionary conditions have been deepening for now more than a month and a half, because initially you could have reversed it, but now that the decline in investment has taken place, the decline in employment has taken place, it means demand will not rise very quickly. Expectations will not change.
So you don't buy the V-shaped recovery theory being trotted by the government economists?
Correct. Yeah. And what the government has done, it has tried to produce data on index of industrial production, on various other things, but there are lacunae in all that, because the government had allowed the old currency to be used for certain purposes. So for instance, for buying petrol, and therefore petrol consumption rose. Everybody filled up, diesel and petrol consumption. Similarly, allowed medicines to be bought with the old currency. So, pharmaceuticals did well. Similarly, there were certain other kinds of goods. But the point is that the index of industrial production largely represents the organized sector and not the unorganized sector. And therefore, the data for the unorganized sector is not captured by this. And because of this problem, what will happen is that when the actual data comes out, then you'll find there's a revision in the index of industrial production, etc. So my suspicion is that at this point, government does not have the data on which to plan for the next year. Okay, because all budgets depend on what has happened and now what will likely to happen. Okay, and what has happened up to October is not representative of what is happening in the year. So what do you project from? Do you project from the 7 months data, or do you project from the 9 months data? Because the 2 months data that came out up to December end was vastly different from that which was the earliest 7 months. So what should the projection be done from? So that's why government budget formulation will have deep trouble. Okay, because the GDP projections, and the chief statistician has come out saying we don't know the effect of demonetization. Now if he admits
even the RBI said that.
Even the RBI said that. So therefore, what should the government project from?
And what you're making a budget in the dark, statistically in the dark, right?
Yes. And also the economic survey which comes out, that also has to make some estimate about it.
So what would be your economic, suppose you were writing the economic survey, I know you have been traditionally writing
Alternate economic
survey. If you were writing the economic survey for this year, this financial year, what would be your broad numbers? Like,
so my suspicion is that already the GDP, instead of rising in the 2 months after November 8th that have elapsed, already is in negative territory, because the anecdotal reports from the various surveys like the State Bank of India survey, Punjab, Haryana, Delhi Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Manufacturers Association suggest
for this quarter, for October, December quarter.
For this period, there's at least 30 to 40% drop. So, like for instance, the Punjab, Haryana, Delhi Chamber of Commerce survey showed that 80% businesses were reporting a decline in their sales.
Which is the State Bank survey also showed that.
For the first week of January, they showed that also. But the Manufacturers Association showed a much larger fall than what the State Bank of India is showing. So in other words, all these surveys are pointing to that. Also the reports coming from the field, whether from the construction industry, whether from the real estate, whether from plantation industry, whether the fish market in Kolkata being not so crowded as earlier, whether it's from the farming sector that farmers are not able to sell their produce. So all this is pointing to a negative growth rather than a positive growth at the moment.
Okay.
So in other words,
if for the whole year, you expect that
the rate of growth would be close to zero or negative, because the first 7 months were good. So you have to average over the 7 months plus the 2 months. So therefore the rate of growth till now would be zero. But the point is, what do you project on? If you project on the 7 months earlier, then it would be a positive
7%,
7%. But that is not what is the situation in the last 2-3 months. Last 2-3 months have been negative growth. Now if you project from that for the budget, there will be a completely different kind of a budget projection. And the question is, what do you do now to take care of this? So therefore the budget is in a pincer. The pincer is that if they try to boost the economy, given that the rate of growth has turned negative, tax collection would not be as buoyant as was expected, and therefore the fiscal deficit will rise. If the fiscal deficit rises, then credit rating agencies will downgrade you. If you don't allow the fiscal deficit to rise, then you cannot boost expenditures on capital items and on social sector, which is needed to get the economy out of the recessionary phase. So therefore the budget is in a pincer. Should it increase expenditures or should it not increase expenditures? And that's why this is a very difficult task for the finance minister at this point, how to plan for the next year, on what basis to plan.
So how much would you, if you are making the budget, what GDP estimate would you take for say 2017-18?
So you see the nominal
to
GDP,
arrive at all the other numbers.
So the nominal GDP is important, and the nominal GDP implies rate of inflation plus the real rate of growth. The real rate of growth is probably close to negative at this point of time. The wholesale price index is going at about 3.5% or thereabouts. So in other words, the nominal GDP would probably be rising at zero, at this point of time. So therefore, in a sense, it's flat. And rather than what the expectations earlier were, that it would be 12% or 10% rate of growth of nominal GDP.
But
so all your revenue calculations will turn out to be incorrect, because if you assume 10 to 12% rate of growth, whereas it turns out to be 0%, then your revenue projections will be wrong. In which case, during the year, you will have to cut back on capital expenditures and social sector expenditures to meet your fiscal deficit target, because the government has been watching this because of the credit rating agencies. So in other words, budget making is a huge crisis.
It will be a nightmare for the
It's a nightmare for the finance ministry.
But tell me, Arun, the stock market seems to be suggesting, at least over the last 4 days, that consumption is kind of slowly coming back. Now, not fully back yet, but some segments are showing consumption coming back, and the stock market seems to be discounting this as it does for the future consumption. And today it's nearly back to the pre-demonetization level, a little below that. How do you read that?
So my suspicion is, you see, because of the increase in the Fed rate, the foreign investment, the FII and the FPI, that has been withdrawing. Now, to compensate for that, what the government has probably done is ask LIC and others to enter the market in a big way. They want support, for the market. Now, the rise in the stock market is because of that, rather than because of the demand, etc.
Also, there's another factor. I must add to what you're saying, which I learned from some analysts in Mumbai. Because so much deposit has come into the banks, a lot of these deposits are going into mutual funds. Because they're sitting in savings account, getting just about 4% or even less. So the depositors are pushing the banks
funds.
are selling to
Yes.
depositors
Correct.
the idea of pushing them into various mutual
Yes.
funds.
So-
The banks are earning a fee income on that.
Correct. So that of course would be happening, but I think more importantly, it's the financial institutions which have been asked to keep the market buoyed up. But that cannot last for very long, because the expectation is the Fed rate will rise further, more foreign funds will go out, and they will begin to have an effect. So usually what has happened at the time of the budget is that the institutional investors have been asked to invest more so that the market remains buoyed. So my own suspicion is that it's not because suddenly consumption has revived, because if unemployment is as large as it is, and as the reports even from early January are that businesses have been affected by 30 to 40%, and Punjab, Haryana, Delhi Chamber of Commerce suggests that in North India the 88% or 80% businesses were affected. If such a large amount of impact is there, then consumption cannot suddenly revive. You know?
How would you respond to Finance Minister Arun Jaitley's assertion that GDP growth is back to normal because the revenues are growing as per the budgeted figures, roughly 14 to whatever 16%.
So
indirect and direct taxes.
revenues were already rising quite substantially. If you notice up to the October period, then direct taxes were rising very rapidly, indirect taxes were rising very
You're
rapidly.
saying revenues did not always indicate
Yes, and
buoyancy in growth.
also they can be for other reasons. Like for instance, why petroleum goods revenue has risen very rapidly is because you allowed old notes to be used. Similarly for pharmaceuticals, you allowed old notes to be used for medicine, so people bought up 3 to 4 months of medicines. People bought up, filled their tanks, whereas usually they would have filled up maybe a quarter tank or so. Now they're filling up the full tank, up to the period of November, December.
People bought people bought forward.
People bought forward,
Yeah.
and similarly industry with its old currency would have bought forward. So therefore there would be a certain degree of buoyancy in that, which would have, but that's only one off. As soon as that period is over, there would be a decline. Okay, and therefore in fact a greater decline would take place. So the data for that will come now, and that data may suggest that when you average it out over the period of 5 months from November to March, then the buoyancy is not as high.
It's
And that's
interesting
what-
you're saying this, because some researchers in Bombay also told me the same thing, that people bought raw materials 6 months ahead.
Correct.
So now they will not buy in January to March, April. So this period data is very critical.
Correct. So the full figures have to come out, and as the chief statistician and the RBI have said, we are unable to estimate the effect of demonetization of the GDP growth.
Okay.
Now, if they are not able to give the figures, then how would the budget get planned? Because budget has to plan for revenue, it has to plan for expenditure, and the buoyancy of taxes is very important, then to be able to estimate it. Secondly, what new policies? The Prime Minister has already announced several things, whether it be on housing or whether it be on banking, etc., in his 31st December speech. Now you have to accommodate those also. So therefore there will be additional expenditures, but whether additional...
There's a talk of a universal basic income to be given to a large number of people, maybe covering 90-95%
But
of the population.
my own take would be that already the demonetization has very sort of critically affected the economy. There's a lot of uncertainty, and if you introduce such a major scheme, without really adequate preparation, then that scheme would maybe be very, very difficult to implement given the current
It could be another
circumstance.
disruption.
It could be another disruption, and therefore I think it's a good idea. We must give to the poor. We must have a negative tax in a sense for the poor. It's a very positive thing. But to do that, we must plan ahead. We must identify who are the poor, where will that money go, how will we deliver
There's
that
also
money.
some talk among some economists that this universal basic income would come from collapsing some existing schemes, welfare schemes, withdrawing them and putting them into this, giving them as basic income.
Yeah.
So that will be the disruption when you withdraw one set of schemes
and try to force it into another, because you see what has happened is that people have adjusted to whatever they were getting in terms of the various schemes. Now those will stop, but when will the new scheme start? How soon would it be possible to do that? How would the identification take place? All that might take time. So in between there could be a lot of
the policy
disruption.
design is very important.
Design is very important, and implementation is always a problem in India, given the leaky
Especially
bureaucracy.
with this government, the way its demonetization has happened, a similar experience could also occur.
So
if it
damage
is not
could-
done properly.
Yes.
So Professor Arun Kumar, there's questions from our viewers. There is Tirtha Deep is asking: is the decrease in GDP possible due to demonetization, and how?
Yeah, so as I said, the reason why demonetization might lead to a decrease in GDP is because cash is needed for circulation, especially in the unorganized sector. and unorganized sector is about 40% of GDP. Reports seem to be suggesting that almost 80% of these units have faced problem, and some reports suggest that maybe up to 50% of decline in output has taken place, and massive layoff has taken place. Now, if 40% of GDP faces 50% decline, that's straight away a 20% decline. So that, and suppose the organized sector hasn't declined at all, which also is very doubtful, then that would lead to a negative rate of growth of the economy. So if the organized sector has also declined in this period as a result of the fact that demand has declined from the unorganized sector and discretionary demand has been postponed, then the decline could be even greater. So that would be the answer.
There's another question from Arun Emadi. And Arun Emadi wants to know whether will the government stroke RBI, this is interesting because the government and RBI
different stance.
Same working reveal the amount of black money unearthed due to demonetization officially. So he's asking whether will the government reveal or RBI reveal?
Well,
what is your sense?
I mean, they will give figures. Ultimately they will give figures. There's no doubt.
They'll have to give it to Parliament.
They have to give it to Parliament. They have to give it to the parliamentary committees and so on and so forth. So ultimately these figures will come out. But from the reports that are already coming out, it appears that 95 to 97% of the old notes have come back. Now, old notes coming back doesn't mean that black income has been unearthed. Some of it may have been black cash. But for that you have to prove that whatever has been deposited is black income. Okay, that means the income tax department has to issue notices, and then these people have to file their returns, which will be in October this year. Then those returns will be scrutinized, which will mean next year. Okay, so even if some black income can be identified out of these old notes deposited, that will not be till 2019. That tax will come. So in other words, this budget will not get the benefit of most of that.
Here I want to add one more thing, Mr. Arun Kumar. I spoke to one member of parliament who was part of the standing committee where the RBI governor and his team made a presentation, had appeared a couple of days ago. And this member of parliament asked him very pointedly, why are you taking so long to figure out how much money has come back? When on December 10 you had said 80% had come back. So from December 10 until now, why can't you count the remaining 20%? So his answer was interesting. He says getting delayed because RBI is trying to figure out the exact quantum of counterfeit notes that have come in. So that, because while accepting the deposits, they were not checking for counterfeit.
Well, some banks were, but not all banks were. And if RBI's own data is accurate, about 400 crores, then you multiply that by 30 because they don't catch everything, that'd be about 10,000 crores. But 10,000 crores in 15 lakh crores is very negligible.
You had predicted that 97% of the money would come back, and indeed money has come back.
So in other words, this counterfeit cannot be the main reason why you can't count
because
it.
It's a very small component of the.
So broadly you can count it, but I think they're fudging it because they don't want to announce that such.
Maybe they're using the counterfeit reason just to
delay the thing.
This is not to say that the amount of counterfeit will be way larger than what was anticipated. There's another question from Saumyo Jyoti Adhikari. Can we expect tax reforms in the budget? What kind of tax reforms? If
so, this budget is going to be a very populist budget. Because you see all the problems of demonetization that have come, which had affected the poor people. Important elections are coming, UP, Punjab, etc. So they would want to make it very populist, and therefore they would announce certain tax concessions. But you see, the problem that would arise is that in a situation where you are in a recessionary condition, the tax revenue would be lower. And if you now further lower it, then how would you meet your expenditure targets? And especially because the government would announce many things, many SOPs to many sections of population, as the Prime Minister did on 31st December. So I think the budgetary deficit would tend to go up. In the end, what will happen is that when the year closes, you'll find that many of these targets have not been met. And that is what UPA 2 used to do, where over 5 years, they cut the total plan expenditure by about 6.5 lakh crores. Every year about there's 1 lakh crore cut because you projected a high revenue figure, you projected a high expenditure figure, those revenue figures didn't come out right, and therefore you cut back on the plan expenditure. So something like that could happen, which would mean that the government would not deliver on the schemes that it is promising to deliver.
So there's another question from Faiz Tajuddin. He's asking what is your estimate or what news, he says, do you have? We don't have any news, but what's your estimate regarding unorganized sector workers being laid off? Can they be absorbed by the organized players? because the informal
Okay.
sector is getting formalized.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
is that transition possible?
Yeah, so-
it's a very critical, very important question.
So, the report seems to suggest that, unorganized sector which produces 40% of the output, large amount of that is agriculture. But what is in services and what is in, your secondary sector, that may be about 40 to 50% also. Now, there, the report seems to be suggesting that at least 40% decline in output, which would translate directly into about 40% of the people laid off. Now, this is a residual sector. It is a residual sector because the organized sector is very highly capital intensive. It's not employing people. So the organized private sector employment has increased from 7.5 million to 9.5 million over 25 years. Okay, in spite of massive investment in
which
it.
is a
So which is negligible because the workforce has increased from 250 million to 450 million. So only 2 million out of the 200 million have got absorbed in this kind of a situation. So therefore, today you are in a situation where this organized sector, which is also suffering, is suddenly not going to be able to absorb it. Formalization does not mean that you convert unorganized into organized sector. Formalization only means registration with the government. But that doesn't mean jobs get created. So therefore, it's not possible that the unorganized sector workers will suddenly start getting absorbed in the organized sector, because that's not happened in the last 27 years. It is in fact the opposite. Because the organized sector is not creating enough jobs, that's why people are going to the unorganized sector. That's why only 2 million additional jobs in the organized sector and 198 million additional jobs in the unorganized sector over the last 25 years.
Even the formalization process is not so easy.
And it's according to the definition. Either you have 10 or more people with power, or 20 or more people without power. Now, if you're less than that, then you don't get formalized. So it's not as if it's an automatic formalization. Having a bank account does not mean you become a part of the formal economy.
Exactly, yeah. There's another question, Professor Arun Kumar, from Ritvik Khare. He says that Arun Kumar said credit rating agencies will downgrade us, but there has been a trend in the credit rating agencies to give higher ratings, as clients often switch over to other credit rating agencies for favorable reviews. So can't India play one credit rating agency is another?
I mean, certainly you can try and play, but the point is no credit rating agency would like to be actually losing its credibility. That it upgrades you, whereas actually the economy is forcing itself, tending to go into a recession. So therefore, in a sense, you can't play at this point of time where the economy is actually in dire straits. So therefore, this possibility, which could have been there in the normal times, but even in normal times, we haven't been really able to play one against the other. So therefore, in this situation where the economy is weakening, to play one against the other would be very difficult in my judgment.
There's a last question which is not, as an economist, you can't answer this. You have to use your political reading. In spite of demonetisation, how is it that in Gujarat Panchayat elections and other places, BJP has won? So how do you understand the pulse of the Indian voter? Asking.
So the point is that Mr. Modi has high credibility. So people really believe that he's trying to tackle the black economy. It's only with time that people are realizing that that's not really happening, and therefore anger seems to be building up, whether it's amongst farmers or whether it's amongst the.
So you're saying that Modi has political capital, but he's slowly
losing that political capital. And the other thing is that you see, Mr. Modi has tried to project the image of a Robin Hood by doing all this, saying that I'll take from the black money walas and give to the poor, and that really hasn't happened, but that worked with the poor people. Thirdly, poor people automatically don't get mobilized. They have to be mobilized by some social forces or some political forces. Now, even our political class actually was quite afraid that if we oppose this move, then we'd be branded as being a black money wala. So they didn't want to be branded. So it's only slowly that people are realizing, whether in the political class or the others, that this move has actually devastated the economy. As that spreads, that will have a political repercussion also. But in India, the poor people automatically don't mobilize themselves.
So it will be a real nightmare for Finance Minister Arun Jaitley as he goes into this budget. Thank you very much, Professor Arun Kumar, for talking to us.
Thanks.
That's all we have for now. Thanks for watching.